Welcome to the Bitcoin Infinity Academy, brought to you by the Plan B Network and Bitbox. In this course, we're discussing my first book, Sovereignty Through Mathematics. Today's chapter is called Money as an Amplifier. I'm Knut Svanholm, and I'm here, as always, with Luke de Wolf. Good morning to you, Luke. How are you today?
Good morning, Knut. I'm great. Looking forward to digging into this chapter, Money as an Amplifier, quite relevant to discussions going on these days in the community and just important concepts to learn generally.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we talked about using money to buy an amplifier here just before we went live here.
Oh, did we? I didn't remember that, but...
A preamp. But that's
a preamp. Yeah. Right.
That was our preamble.
Anyway, about the preamp. Good. And before we dive in, just a reminder, if you'd like to get involved with the Academy, you can do so from our Geyser page, geyser.fund/project/infinity. You can find all the details about our Academy where you can join, follow along with the discussions, join the live recordings, and just generally be involved with everything we're doing here at Team Bitcoin Infinity. So go check that out if you'd like to support us. All right. Let's just dive in. Money as an amplifier. Money can be viewed as many things. It is often described as a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a unit of account. As discussed earlier, one can boil down the definition even further. At its very core, money can be defined as a linguistic tool for expressing value, or even just gratitude to another person through space and time. From this perspective, money acts as an amplifier of a person's personality. If you're altruistic by nature, suddenly having lots of money won't make you less generous, but rather enable you to express your personality in more ways. Unfortunately, in a cultural environment such as the one we live in now, credit is cheap, and economic incentives are skewed. Impulsive, irrational financial decisions in all segments of society are dictating all of our lives. If we didn't have inflation, in other words, if we had sound money, we would be incentivized to save rather than spend. Sustainability would come naturally to us. The lack of sound money also affects the impact money has on our personalities and its effectiveness as a personality amplifier. Sound money would allow for more honesty and more real solutions to more real problems. All right. What do you want to say about that, Knut?
Yeah, this is, I love reading this because it's hinting at this current concept that we're discussing in the later books and on the show often, which is that store of value is a flawed term, and it should actually be medium of exchange over space and time. So I prefer medium of exchange over time over store of value, because you can't really store value since value is subjective. What you can do is trade with your future self, so hence that term. And this amplifier thing, this is still true. And I think one of the reasons that capitalism gets the blame for all sorts of things in the world is because we're not really living in capitalism. And people think that being wealthy is not necessarily the product of having provided goods and services to other people. Like, it's not necessarily that. It could also be that you use the fiat incentives and got the money in more shall we say evil ways. So this is what this is hinting at, I guess. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to continue to disagree with you about the value of the term store of value, because that's subjectively better in my view. Just to riff on that really hard. It serves as a good concept, I think, of distinguishing the difference between that someone might put their money into some place to save it over time. Yes, exactly. But I think you are in fact storing it, and I'm not actually sure what value being subjective has to do with the term not being accurate. But
well, it's also I'm also slightly allergic to unit of account these days, because money doesn't measure value; it signals value to others and prices through prices. So I prefer the Misesian definition, which is Mises always only referred to money only ever referred to money as a medium of exchange. And I think what he meant was medium of exchange over space and time. So that's my stance on this.
Okay, and I mean, I think I might serve as an intermediary between Mr. Ultra Praxeology and the reality that these two terms are both widely used, and I think they are useful terms. Unit of account as well. I mean, the things that prices are in, that's simple enough, I think. But anyway, we're being pedantic here.
Yeah,
we also agree mostly. So
yeah, we're being pedantic, and it's, with the unit of account thing, it's important to remember that the monetary bill was first introduced as a receipt for a specific amount of gold, and when it's no longer redeemable for gold, and you're just using the fiat currency as your unit of account, then the signal is by definition distorted. It doesn't represent anything actually scarce in nature. So in that sense, Bitcoin is a way better unit of account because there's only 21 million. So it's yeah.
When we fully hyper Bitcoinize, Bitcoin will be a very good unit of account. It won't be nearly as volatile, and prices. I think people being able to think in terms of a unit of account is actually the main thing. Like, we think in dollars and euros and etc., because those are numbers that we vaguely seem to be familiar with, things costing a certain amount in, and it doesn't change that much day to day. These aren't currencies that are hyperinflating. They are inflating, but they don't change day to day that much.
No, but you could make the argument that Bitcoin will change more day to day in terms of what it can buy you than a fiat currency does. Right now, they need to print enormous amounts to keep up the facade that the prices aren't falling. And if you measure through Bitcoin, every price is falling. All prices are falling, and at a very rapid pace. And even after hyper-Bitcoinization, the whole of the global economic pie will still grow bigger by, well, say something like 15% per year. It's still more than the 2 to 3% inflation in the fiat currencies, what they're claiming. So I think, yeah, volatility goes down, but not necessarily. That doesn't necessarily mean that prices will be stable. I think they will drop faster than people think. Just remember to use the correct lens. If you're measuring prices from the Bitcoin lens, it's way easier to see these phenomena for what they really are.
Yes, and I think now this gets us into the point of the chapter, the money as an amplifier thing. So I guess the idea here, it's straightforward enough, I think, to me, that you're talking about that money is the mechanism that someone can choose to allocate their resources, and that depends on their personality, what they value subjectively at any given time. But a person's personality is like what they tend to value generally, something like that.
Yeah, and also action speaks louder than words. And if you have a loudspeaker, if you have an amplifier, action speaks even louder than it would have. So there's something to that.
Okay, maybe let's explore this through the rest of the chapter here.
Yeah, it's a long chapter, so we should.
Okay, let's continue. One of the problems that arises from speaking a malfunctioning language of value is that it affects freedom of speech. If the system is rigged to focus on everything but the underlying problem, the entire political landscape becomes a cosmetic charade to keep us from asking the really hard questions about how a human society really ought to operate. Can a person be truly honest publicly in an environment that constantly forces him or her to work harder and harder to afford a higher and higher cost of living due to artificial inflation? Those who are wealthy enough might, but the system keeps funneling power from the common person to the elite. In an era where a handful of companies handle almost all internet traffic, subverting free thought can be a very dangerous thing. In addition to the subtle subversion originating from a flawed monetary policy, the titans of Silicon Valley seem more and more prone to give in to the angry mob that proclaims to stand united under the banner of social justice. Political correctness, feeding on a collective feeling of guilt in some parts of the Western world, plays a large part in the wave of censorship that has been deplatforming some of the more controversial content creators lately. Okay, some interesting ideas. What did you mean by all this?
Yeah, and it's important to remember that this book was written in 2019, so the landscape is slightly different now. We didn't have Nostr back then. Elon didn't own Twitter and didn't call it X. But anyway, what I'd really like to recommend here is a book by Murray Rothbard called The Ethics of Liberty, where he makes a very good argument for why property rights are more important than free speech laws. And it's simply because free speech implies that the property right has already been violated. If there is such a thing as a public space, that means it's not privately owned, or at least that the facade of not having it privately owned is there. There is still someone in control of the thing, like usually a politician or a bureaucrat. So in a sense, there is no such thing as public goods. They're always controlled by a private person. So free speech is in this sense just a facade always, and they're claiming that we have free speech. But the reality of it, like what Rothbard points out, is the follow-up. Everyone always forgets the follow-up question: free speech where? Like, where is this free speech law supposed to be applied? And of course, on my property, I get to choose the rules. In a just world, I should add this. In a just world, I get to choose who says what on my property. So if I invite guests into my house and they say something I don't like, I have the right to throw them out. And this is always the case. There's a completely free speech thing probably doesn't exist, and because you always get to choose something. There are things like 4chan and Nostr to a certain extent, I guess. Still, the owner of the relay gets to choose whatever they choose to relay, even in a Nostr world, or what was that? Hyper-Nostrified world? That's the word I'm looking for here. So the point is, not your platform, not your laws. Like if you own the platform, you should be able to say whatever you want on it. It's not censorship, really, if it's not enforced by a threat of violence. So when the government interferes with whatever these platforms do, that's censorship. So if the government pressures Google to censor something, that's censorship. If Google chooses to do it on their own volition, then it's not censorship because it's their. Maybe Google is a bad example here, but if Facebook, for instance, or Twitter chooses to censor something by their own free will, then it's not really censorship because they don't owe you anything. You're on their platform using their service, so it's not a public space. So. But these things get so muddled when you have government at all, because they always interfere with everything. So it's very hard to see what the underlying problem is. And having this praxeological lens to view the world through, and to admit that there is no such thing as a public good that is always controlled by someone. Someone gets to make the decision. Makes it easier to see what free speech and freedom of thought laws are actually about. Yeah, a convoluted way of saying that, but the underlying truth here is that property rights are more important than free speech laws.
Yeah, well, okay, this is really interesting here, and I mean, I think you touched on a really important point that I think it's not only for censorship; it's for all the sorts of things that are maybe traditionally seen as anarcho-capitalist or whatever. For example, unions is another thing that I think is interesting. I think unions will also exist as an expression of free speech and free association in anarcho-capistan, because people will be allowed to just get together and say, hey, we are going to negotiate with you collectively, and if you don't do that, we will all quit. But
individually.
But the problem becomes that if there are protections for unions, government mandated, right? That in the Western world, across the Western world, there are laws preventing unions from being so-called discriminated against. Employers can't just sack the union; they have to negotiate with them. Strikes are given certain protections, right? And it all comes from the government saying that you have to accept this. You cannot do anything about it, right? Like I think if there is a balance of power thing, and if an employer is treating all of its workers unfairly, and all of the workers say, "Hey, we're going to quit," well then okay then, just quit. The employer is perfectly welcome to hire back other people or hire back some of the individuals who thought they had the stomach to not be working for a long time. Also, enforced union membership, right? Like if you have a job and you must pay some amount of money to your union as a part of that job, right? All of these things are just funky. And my point here entirely is just that the problem is not because of the thing. The problem is not because of the so-called lefty thing. It's because the government enforces it. Just like the free speech stuff with the censorship.
No, it's all mafia stuff. So, also to remember, like in a world without good government intervention, there is no such thing as unemployment. There is always something for everyone to do, because you don't have minimum wage laws. So you can always get paid to do something. Like the money flows much more naturally in such an environment. So this is, yeah. But we'll get into all of those anarcho-capitalistic manifesto-y things later on. I guess let's get on with this chapter, shall we?
Okay, sure. Let's do that. We live in dangerous times when it comes to freedom of thought. The old media publishers keep claiming that their worldview is the only honest one, while regular people, and all their different opinions, are increasingly challenging what is and what isn't to be considered news. The increasing distrust of politicians all over the globe might be a product of fearmongers to some extent, but it is also a direct consequence of the fact that people have more options when it comes to how they consume information about the current state of the world. In other words, brainwashing is not as easy as it used to be. Unfortunately, distrust in politicians has mostly led to more extreme variations of the same thing. Nationalism on the right and socialism on the left are ideologies on the rise on both sides of the Atlantic. These are red herrings at best. Politicians won't give power back to the people. That's just not what they do. In the next decade, many of humanity's most important decisions will be made. The fate and future of the EU, China, and the US will be determined by these decisions. You won't be able to alter or even influence them, but you will be able to choose to what extent they will dictate your future. There are ways of opting out of everything. You can quit watching TV, stop reading newspapers, and fill your roof with solar panels. But most importantly, you can opt out of the financial system to whatever extent suits you. Bitcoin is a voluntary system. Democracy isn't. Nice.
Yeah, it speaks for itself, this paragraph, I think. Yeah, and it's still true today. It's the same divide between nationalism and socialism. And if you combine the two, you get Nazis.
Honestly, I don't have too much more to add to this one, so let's just continue. 2018 saw the rise of the so-called intellectual dark web, an umbrella term for a collection of free thinkers who have used the internet to defend their respective positions in a variety of matters, and freedom of speech particularly for the last couple of years. Being concerned with the rising trend of deplatforming and censorship on major social media, some of the more popular members of the group are now trying to find alternative ways of monetizing their content. 10 years after Bitcoin's immaculate conception, major renegade thinkers are starting to oppose the Orwellian tendencies of the Silicon Valley giants. All the tools we need to take a stance against censorship are at our disposal, but it's up to each and every one of us to decide whether we dare to use them or not. The internet keeps on disrupting every imaginable business model and shows no signs of slowing down this process. On the contrary, peer-to-peer solutions like Uber and Airbnb are increasingly taking over and exposing so-called regulated markets for what they truly are: cartels. In an era where credit card companies have the power to disconnect any user with an unwanted spending pattern from their money, centralized databases can be very dangerous, and a business model is not really disrupted until every rent-seeking middleman has been removed from the equation. Whoever controls the money supply is the ultimate middleman. That's where the cord needs to be cut if we truly want to emancipate ourselves. You decide, not them, you. Okay.
Yeah, we're in manifesto territory here, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely.
Makes it kind of dated, talking about the intellectual dark web. And it's also an observation that many members of what was called the intellectual dark web back in 2018 are now on the other side of this debate, like urging us to trust the experts and trust the science and stuff, and attributing too much to the free to podcasters and such. Like you had the Douglas Murray comedian Dave Smith debate, for instance. This is going to date this even more, I know, but I think, yes, there are, of course, there are instances in your life where you should trust the experts. Like if you need to fix your car, you go to a mechanic. You don't go to you don't go to a sushi place to fix your car. Like people have different areas of expertise. That's not strange. I think, though, in the past, the media has had such a big influence on everything that we think that we have this urge to think that everyone who features in any type of media is an expert on something, which is just not true. Like media functions completely differently. And clicks and likes are generated not necessarily by people telling the truth, but entertainment and fear-mongering generates a lot of clicks and likes. So does OnlyFans. I mean, this is it's a different landscape, and I think the confusion stems from people having too high of a trust in media in general to begin with. They have been brainwashed for a long time. So when the internet is taking over and there are new media outlets and you're the media now, the boomers and so on are not prepared for how much more you have to protect yourself against lies, like how much more rigorous you have to be. I mean, you had to before too, to be fair, because there were lies all along in the media landscape. It's just,
well, okay, the place where I went to here, one of them was that the intellectual dark web sort of expanded and contracted a little bit. The membership of the intellectual dark web was never clearly defined, but some of the major figures were, of course, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, the
Douglas
Weinstein
Murray.
brothers.
Yeah, Weinstein brothers, yeah.
Yeah. And well, so I wouldn't even have said Douglas Murray. Yeah,
he was definitely a part of it. Yeah,
it could be. But I think the thing is that many of them kept up what they were saying, and then the reason why it resonated so hard for so many people, myself included, was that they really were saying what was the problem with the world before it was on anyone else's radar. And I think now, 5-6 years later, it seems like they were just saying, but what is now kind of obvious to at least part of the population, but they really were the canary in the coal mine to a certain extent, and it was dangerous to be affiliated with them to publicly express support for what they were doing, right? And I mean, the Orwellianness of it all, as we kind of still see here, that is not entirely fixed. You can still get canceled. It might be harder. There are more organizations and people who stand up against that, but kind of normie corporations are maybe still susceptible to, hey, this person has committed wrongthink, maybe we should not give them a job, kind of thing still. And I'm coming to a point here. Like I think the trouble with all of this is that the levers of free speech and the levers of what is acceptable still have these middlemen in them. Like there's still literally the media. The media is the definition of the perfect rent-seeking middleman. It's the people who try and get in the middle of your communication. And then there's all these narratives they get put into people's heads, and they spread like wildfire. And I don't even know what the fix is exactly, but opting out is a good idea.
I mean, the Overton window can shift both ways, like what is okay to say and what is not okay to say. And from an ANCAP perspective, a company should be able to discriminate, like, and fire people who say things that are not aligned with what that company thinks about things. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. And it's sort of in a functioning society, that mechanism sort of needs to be there. There needs to be boundaries for what is okay and what is not okay to say. But I think the free market fixes that on its own. I mean, who am I to say, or who is anyone else to say what the boundaries should be? Like, society will come up with those boundaries anyway. And when obvious, like, crazy talk becomes is not a boundary anymore, like that there are more than two sexes, for instance, or that the planet will melt in 5 years, so or any racist stuff, like to take an example on the other side, actual racist stuff where you judge people because of their background, genetic background. Where I'm getting at is, like, these things have natural boundaries that do occur anyway and do not require government intervention. I think that's always the worst part.
Yeah, and I think another point here on this is just that, or maybe just to echo your point, sunlight is the best disinfectant. It's better to get these ideas out and talk about them, but let the ideas compete with each other.
Yeah.
There are very few ideas that you need to just completely shut down immediately. Calls to violence are still considered like a high level thing here, but
that sentence in itself, sunlight is the best disinfectant, it's probably not medically accurate to 100%, but it shouldn't be labeled false or fake news either. Like, it doesn't need a stamp of approval from anyone. Like, you can take everything with a grain of salt, and you should, like, any statement.
Shall we continue?
Absolutely.
Okay. The phenomenon of fake news is easier to understand if you remember how much bigger newspaper organizations used to be in the past and what made them smaller. Their whole revenue model was disrupted when the internet turned the advertising industry on its head. All of a sudden, ads were no longer a guessing game, but a precise tool that could be used to collect vast amounts of data about how many potential customers a product would have, and later on specific data about each and every customer. This led to a downsizing of the news organizations as their ad revenues started to shrink. Simultaneously, everyone on Earth was given the ability to post whatever they had to say to everyone else and to monetize their voices through ads. Both the old and the new media quickly started to accuse each other of spreading false information, and the trust that we had all outsourced to journalists started to erode. Nowadays, it's harder than ever to separate trustworthy sources from untrustworthy ones. On the other hand, propaganda machines are harder to build since everyone is able to hear different perspectives on every subject. What would happen if money itself were to be disrupted in the same way that the old media houses were? What if people started to label the full faith and credit of the National Bank of Nation X as fake news? What happens when we collectively start to question the credibility of our dollars, euros, or yen? We're about to find out, and we can still choose what side of history we want to be on. It's hard to separate real from fake when it comes to news, but when it comes to money itself, the perfect tool for evaluating its realness is already here. The market will tell you what's valuable and what's not. Over time, the truth will reveal itself. Okay.
Yeah, imagine that, like the blockbuster video or Kodak moment of money itself. How disruptive that is. It's something that it was one of those first thoughts that just blew my mind when it came to Bitcoin. Like, what if money is all of a sudden not printable and not controlled by anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think here the whole idea of the connection between speech and money in this chapter is an interesting interplay. There isn't a whole lot of, what would I say, This is a little, as you said, a little more manifesto-y of a chapter. It's not really saying anything about the core properties of Bitcoin. This is more like a social commentary on that we have all of these changes in the modern day. There's all these technological changes, and Bitcoin and money in general as kind of the thing that is going to expose the fake news of fiat money, I guess. That's the next technological change. I think that's the point of the chapter, right?
Yeah, it's a final piece of the puzzle of the internet. It's the protocol for value, which is just completely flips everything on its head. It's like the internet up until Bitcoin is just scratching the surface of what potential it has, like free communication between every single person on Earth. That's just so powerful if taken to its extreme, and Bitcoin enables us to do that. It has pointed out to us that money doesn't need to be anything but speech, and that insight is just so powerful because it means we can do anything with maximum efficiency. We just have to cut out the middleman.
Very good point. Let's continue and see where this goes. Money is an amplifier of ideas, and money doesn't really care if the idea itself is good or bad. Political ideas often have the opposite effect of what their intended, or at least advertised, effect is. An income tax, for instance, stops generating revenue for the state as soon as the tipping point of the Laffer curve is reached. After a certain level, the income tax just prevents people from working altogether, especially if there's a social insurance policy in place. The Robin Hood-esque narrative of the left is often portrayed as a morally noble thing by its proponents, despite the growing number of examples of the opposite all over the globe. The internet startups are leaving San Francisco for Texas, and the misfits have started flocking in instead. People are literally dying from drug overdoses on the streets, while the politically correct overpaid hipster in the neighboring cafe enjoys the feeling of superiority that comes with the environmentally friendly paper straw he just got in his chai latte. Opportunist men in their 30s claim to be refugee children in order to leech on the welfare states of Sweden and Germany, creating a political divide and a much worse situation for those in actual need of help. In a world with sound money, the greedy would have to provide a lot more value to their fellow man in order to accumulate wealth, since money would be harder to come by. We had better remember that Robin Hood was, first and foremost, fighting against taxes. Money is an amplifier, and unsound money inevitably produces unsound societies. Okay, This one is interesting.
Yeah, I might first try to explain the Laffer curve. So this is a curve that you have on the x-axis. You have the amount of taxes, and on the y-axis you have how much money that tax will generate for the government. And if you have 0% taxes, the government gets no money. But the same is true for 100% tax, because if everyone's taxed to 100%, there is no money for the government, because no one does anything, because there's no point in doing anything, since you don't get to you don't get to keep anything in that sense. So the theory is that there is an optimal point where you maximize the revenue for the government. And yeah, as an ANCAP, I would say that optimal point is 0, because then more ends could be met and resources wouldn't be misallocated the way they are, because more people would reach their actual end goals. But that's sort of beside this point. If you want to maximize your thievery, you shouldn't take everything. It's sort of like you shouldn't fish the entire school of fish. You should leave a couple of fish to reproduce and produce more fish in the future. Like you shouldn't kill all your chickens at once. If you want to keep your chicken population, like that, it's the same logic applies, I guess.
Yeah, very good. And well, I think an interesting thing here is that maybe all of this got a little bit spicy, but one of the really, really key points here is that the social welfare is really just such a pernicious thing that has massive hidden consequences. It's what enables the homeless dying on the streets and so-called refugees, so-called asylum seekers coming to the Western countries of the world and enjoying a free handout. And without that, without the social safety net guaranteed by everyone and enforced by violence, forced by coercion from the government, without that, people would be much less likely to fall into those positions. And of course, you're still going to have people that have mental problems or simply are not having good luck. But you know what? You don't need a society of an entire country to step in to save them, right? They have friends and family, I presume, or even just basic community services. Churches are supposedly in the business of giving, right? Taking care of people down on their luck. So maybe those organizations could step in instead. And if someone absolutely falls through the cracks because they don't have anybody and nobody is there for them, well, that's unfortunate. But I think it beats there being an actual incentive to be on the streets. The same thing goes for entire populations of the third world being willing to come to the West in order to get whatever will be handed out to them because they have a nicer standard of living there, and the women are attractive and give them lots of opportunities to do nasty things. So it's not good.
Yeah, without risking grouping everyone together, this entire thing is about. It's not only social security and handouts to immigrants and stuff. Like it's every single any redistribution of wealth will favor opportunists that move from one jurisdiction to another just to get the free handout. It just as bailing out the banks when they do bad things will incentivize them to do more bad things. It's super simple. You get what you pay for. If you pay for unproductivity, you get the unproductivity. Like if you pay for productivity, you get productivity. So like if you pay for destructive behaviors and irresponsible behavior, you will get irresponsible behavior. It's as simple as that. And I don't think it is actually helping the people in actual need of help. And that's sort of the worst part. Also, if everyone got to keep their money, it would be much easier to be the church helping the poor people. Like all of these altruistic organizations would have more resources. They would be amplified.
Theoretically, the churches are tax exempt in most jurisdictions, but the people who are paying money to them, donating to them, might be willing to donate more or whatever it is. So your argument stands. It's just multiple layers in.
Yeah, and I would say nothing in this world is tax exempt because everything is influenced by taxes, at least as a second order effect. So yes, and one could also put into question why churches should be treated any differently than any other organization in the world. So like if you drop all the taxes, you drop all the problems.
Yeah, there we go. I was gonna make the same joke if you didn't. Well, it's not a joke actually. That's very serious.
It's funny because it's true.
Yes. Let's continue, and I'm already seeing that this is going to get even more spicy. As the Bitcoin network grows, so does its fee market. Some people argue that because of this, Bitcoin cannot scale. This viewpoint stems from an unsound attitude towards Bitcoin. Some loud-mouthed actors in the cryptocurrency community start to bicker and moan whenever Bitcoin chooses to implement, or more often than not, chooses to not implement a proposed upgrade. Their view of what Bitcoin ought to be doesn't matter to Bitcoin. Bitcoin's ironclad resistance to the whims of the self-entitled early investor Tony Stark wannabes of its social media entourage is one of the biggest aspects of what makes it so special. Imagine trying to buy a cup of coffee with gold. In order to make a safe transaction where the validity of your tiny gold pebble was verified by several independent chemists, and your pebble was transported to your local Starbucks in an armored van, you would have to pay an absolutely enormous fee. Despite its obvious flaws as a medium of exchange, gold is very valuable. Despite its complicated divisibility, its lack of eligible usage properties, its lack of a decentralized Layer 2 scaling solution, and its relatively easy confiscatability, gold remains a good store of value. Bitcoin is also, regardless of what anyone thinks about it, a store of value above a medium of exchange. This is more important than it might seem. If Bitcoin should fail at holding value long-term, its whole value proposition would disappear. A fast and smooth, highly centralized medium of exchange is not a groundbreaking invention in any sense. We already have plenty of those. It is quite arrogant to think that your own personal influence could steer Bitcoin in another direction. You can deceive people into thinking that your fork of Bitcoin is the real deal, but that will damage your reputation more than it will damage Bitcoin in the long run. A fork of Bitcoin ignores Bitcoin's consensus rules, which makes a fork little more than any other copy-pasted code. Okay, quite a few things to dig into here, I think.
Yes, this is in the wake of the block size wars, so it's like many of these references are to that and the outcome of that. And store of value over medium exchange, that's a funny one. I would say medium exchange over time, as you know. The whole point, though, is that in order to be a medium exchange, every exchange over space also happens in time. So you need the temporal dimension before you can do anything in the spatial dimensions. That's just how the world works. Yeah, and gold not being a good medium exchange here, not being very divisible, not being very transportable. We get into the 6 properties of money in later chapters and later books. Yeah, speaking of Bitcoin forks and stuff, maybe we should do an entire Academy series on Roger Ver's book, because he's still doubling down on his obviously flawed narrative, and like he tried to change Bitcoin and he couldn't. The reality is not working in his favor. So and I read the first chapter of that book, and after each paragraph, I just knew I could debunk every single argument he's making in it. So that would be fun. But then again, I don't want to give it too much attention because it is noise.
Yeah, I strongly disagree that would be fun. I'm not masochistic enough to do that. But I think to get into a couple of the points here, like the contrast between Bitcoin and gold is useful here. It's a description of why Bitcoin is money. And that's kind of the point. That's really kind of the point, that Bitcoin as money is the most important thing. And there are actors all over Bitcoin these days, and I think this is how the narrative has changed. Nobody is trying to fork Bitcoin anymore. They're trying to do the scams on Bitcoin. And they're trying to also there's another control problem here currently at the time of recording, where basically the Bitcoin Core client has a small set of developers who are, if they want to, able to make changes to the standard Bitcoin implementation and ignore the will of the community. As long as it doesn't change Bitcoin's consensus rules, they can do many things that impact the economic conditions of Bitcoin, making scamming easier and other things like that. So we're not talking about forks anymore, but we are talking about the ability of people to change Bitcoin. And this small group is able to change Bitcoin to a large extent, as long as it doesn't change the consensus rules and make a real fork. But what we're seeing is that there is a large group of individuals that are pushing back against this by using an alternative Bitcoin client, Bitcoin Knots, and by simply refusing to accept the premise that Bitcoin is anything other than money. I've seen on social media something like Bitcoin is a database is this year's big blocks or whatever it is.
I had fun with that.
Right.
I had some fun with that by replacing the word money with the word database in song lyrics and so on.
Right.
No, it's absolutely true. They can do these changes, but they can't do them without a backlash. And at some point, that backlash is so harsh to them that they will have to change their minds. Like there will, if the changes are too controversial, they won't be implemented. It's as simple as that, because the backlash is too big. At least that's what we hope will happen, and that's the promise of Bitcoin, that the users are actually in charge. The block size wars and the outcome of that showed that we could win the battle, but it's not a guarantee that we will win every battle in the future. In order for that to be true, Bitcoiners have to stay vigilant and have to act in their own best self-interest and act to protect the network as a monetary network. Like, if we don't, Bitcoin is just as fragile as any other shitcoin. It's as simple as that. But it is robust. The 21 million limit, all of this stuff, the censorship resistance, is only there because we make it be there. Like we enforce that through running nodes and doing things properly.
One of the funniest things I've heard, one of the funniest arguments against, doing anything about the spam and stuff is that, well, if Bitcoin's anti-fragile, it's going to be able to survive this attack or whatever it is. And part of that anti-fragility is users doing things to prevent this stuff. Like it's really quite funny that people just completely misunderstand what anti-fragile actually means. The anti-fragility comes from the users. It doesn't come at all from the technical properties.
No, exactly. Bitcoin isn't anti-fragile if we're not. Like, the Bitcoin is only anti-fragile because Bitcoiners are anti-fragile. So we need to stay anti-fragile.
Absolutely. Let's continue. I think we're on the same vein here for a little bit too. Admitting that you're a Bitcoiner publicly is not without risk. Not only does it pose a personal risk to you as you become a potential target for burglars and thieves, but in doing so, you also put your reputation at stake. Not mainly because of the reason people think, namely that Bitcoin might not work, and its price might go to zero because of this or that. The biggest damage to the reputation of us Bitcoiners is being done by the seemingly endless number of scammers and free riders that this technology attracts. Even though the Bitcoin network is a lot bigger than any of its competitors' networks, people outside of the cryptocurrency space are having a hard time telling the difference. As most, if not all, of Bitcoin's rivals are scams, Bitcoin is being perceived as guilty by association by a large portion of the general public. This may cause the public Bitcoin enthusiast a lot of reputational damage in the short term. Long term, however, is a different matter altogether. In the long term, denying the impact Bitcoin will have might be a far worse opinion to hold. The people going public with their ill-informed skepticism about something they don't fully understand will be remembered in the same manner as those comparing the internet to a fancy fax machine in the 90s. Bitcoin is hard to understand because it shatters many political ideas, since money becomes virtually non-confiscatable in a Bitcoin-denominated world economy. Just as the business models of the 20th century that revolved around charging people for selling them copies of films, music, or books got shattered by subscription services such as Netflix, Spotify, or Audible, macroeconomic business models based on the notion that you can force people to crowdfund projects through taxes or inflation will suffer the same fate if they don't adapt quickly enough. This realization is way too big a mental somersault for some people to grasp. It turns how we think about value on its head and forces us to accept the hard truths of economics, currently only truly understood by economists of the Austrian variety. Given a generation or two, though, Bitcoin's advantages will simply be undeniable. All right, that's the chapter.
Yeah, the reputation thing. It's interesting as today that or yesterday that Financial Times documentary about strategy and Michael Saylor came out, where the lady compared still who has covered Bitcoin for 7 years still doesn't understand its value proposition at all and compares it to her own teeth. That was I just found it hilarious, and these people are going to look more and more clownish the more that time passes. Peter Schiff, for instance, who has been attacking Bitcoin and defending gold for the last decade. Like, his track record, it's just hilarious, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the thing about the reputational impact of being a Bitcoiner and uh, the long-term effect that that is going to have in comparison to these, fax machine metaphorists, it's tough. A lot of Bitcoiners have a policy that they just don't talk about Bitcoin in real life to people they know, and I think that's a very good policy. I don't bring it up at all. I actually had recently an interaction with a colleague at my fiat job who had found my LinkedIn profile and had found that I'm a Bitcoin person and done a little digging and decided to strike up a conversation about it and everything. And it's like, okay, since you've decided to look into this, I'll have a talk with you. And it's all the usual things, like you say, like, well, is it going to go to zero and blah blah blah, acting surprised at assertions about inflation and stuff like this. But if people are actually interested in talking, though, at least they're much more interested in maybe having a conversation and finding out about this stuff. But everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve, something like that. And
yeah. Pill now, a suppository later, as Samson says.
Yeah. So I guess what I'd say the total sum of this chapter is that Bitcoin and speech together are highly intertwined, and money being used as speech through the means of allocating one's resources is really the key point here, and that people will be better able to allocate their resources in total if the money system isn't broken. I think that's a good summary, right?
Yeah, there's also in these two last paragraphs here, there's a lot about other cryptos, which are almost forgotten at this point because of their irrelevancy. I mean, but yeah, there's still something to say that when the name of the game is money itself, that will obviously attract some of the worst people in the world. So Bitcoin, this great idea, this agreement on a fixed set of rules that allows us to communicate value without third-party interference or censorship, is fucking great. But it also attracts people who think they can piggyback off of that and make a quick buck. And they come in throngs. Shitcoiners are everywhere, and insincere people and people misunderstanding what the problem Bitcoin solves. Like, there are only two types of shitcoiners. Either you're an actual scammer, or you're a gullible person helping a scammer. Like, there are no in betweens, and this is what's so sad about it. And still to this day, a lot of people fall for scams, and a lot of people don't even see what the scam is. And they buy other stuff. They buy Bitcoin substitutes. Today, it's not shitcoins anymore, alternative cryptocurrencies, but it may be ETFs or, companies holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet, like paper Bitcoin, basically, that are custodied by a third party. Not your keys, not your coins, still applies. Like, this is what we have to get through to into people's heads.
Absolutely. Well, and I think with that, did you have anything else you wanted to say in summary on this episode?
Yeah, a short point about this, the selling copies in the second paragraph here. Like, people, this is about intellectual property, basically, and how fake that is. Like, if I copy something that you own, you don't lose what you own. It's just that both of us get to use the thing you own. Like, this is intellectual property in general. And I think what people miss about intellectual property is that the 20th century was the anomaly here. Everything up until the 20th century, you couldn't make money from copies of intellectual stuff like books and films and music, because you simply couldn't copy it very easily. Well, you could copy books, but like, it's way easier to print on demand via Amazon is way more efficient than Gutenberg's actual printing press was. Like, it took time and effort to replicate a book. So during the 20th century, people could make money selling copies of shit. But now we have the internet, so you can Control-C, Control-V everything, which means you can't really make money off of copies anymore because copying stuff is basically free, especially in the intellectual property realm. But even for stuff, it's way easier to construct stuff today than it ever was. Like additive manufacturing and 3D printing and stuff. Like it's so much more efficient than it used to be. The robotic warehouses, all of this stuff, working in tandem or in concert to drive prices down to their marginal cost of production for every single good and service on Earth. And the reason that Bitcoin cannot be copied is because it's not a thing on the internet; it's a thing in people's heads. The thing that unlocks the Bitcoin is the private key. And that is always a secret being kept from everyone else. It's based on information asymmetry. That's one person has access to information that another person doesn't have access to. So this is, in a sense, then Bitcoin becomes the only true intellectual property. It's the only thing that you actually can say that you own in a practical sense. In the informational realm, and more on that in later books and later chapters.
All right, and with that, I think that is it for this chapter. A bit of a more abstract one, talking about all of this connections to speech kind of stuff, but certainly covering quite a few interesting things here. So. I think with that wrap up, let's thank our sponsors. First of all, Plan B Network. If you're interested in more great educational resources, go to planb.network to check out everything that they have there. We're happy to be a part of the Plan B Network now with this show. And of course, there's also Bitbox, our favorite hardware wallet provider. They don't compromise on their security, but they're extremely easy to use, Swiss manufactured. So go to bitbox.swiss/infinity, and you can get a discount with our code and show your support for the show there also if you need a hardware wallet. So anything else to add, Knut?
Plan B. Yeah, I'm part of the Plan B Biz School. So I'm going to give a lecture in Lugano here in mid-June. And we're also going to the Plan B Forum in late October, the conference in Lugano. So use code Infinity for a discount of the ticket there, I think. I don't know if we have the discount code there yet, but we have our discount code for everything else. So use code Infinity wherever you can on the internet and see if it works.
Sounds perfect. And of course, we're going to plenty of other conferences. Knut is flying out to Ireland fairly soon here. And then we've got the Prague conference coming right up, BTC Prague. Then, of course, and then right after that is Bitcoin Rodeo in Calgary, my hometown. And then, of course, we have Baltic Honey Badger in Riga, and finally BTC Hell. So that'll round off our fantastic summer. And then, as Knut said, we've got the Lugano conference, and then it should also be the conference in Bulgaria just before that.
Just before Lugano, yeah.
So we're quite busy as always,
as we should be.
And with that, I think this has been the Bitcoin Infinity Academy. Anything else to add, Knut?
Spadoinkle, yes. Well, I've forgotten to say Spadoinkle.
Perfect. Thanks, Knut. This has been the Bitcoin Infinity Academy. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.